Hello. I usually start by saying welcome to Monday Matters, or what difference does that make? I'm not sure what to say right now because I'm not sure what this is for. But at least in part, I'm sharing this with my new good friends, Ross and Angela, and I trust this will be a blessing to you. My name is Mike Courtney, Dr. Mike Courtney. I am founder and former director of Branches Counseling Center. Branches is a faith-based counseling group in Middle Tennessee and beyond. We are about 20 years old. We started with these two principles. One, that we would have a marriage between faith-based counseling and state-licensed therapists to try to bring the best of both of those together. And the second is that we would never turn anyone away, regardless of their ability to pay. That was our humble beginnings about 20 years ago. Today, Branches has 5 offices across the Southeast. We have about 30 therapists. We saw 18,000 clients last year. We do all across the board counseling, depression, anxiety, marital issues, anger management, all those things you might imagine. We also do spiritual direction. We do life coaching. We do medical weight loss, and we do med management. My son is a psychiatric PA, does med management for us, and God has been good. God's been faithful. And that's Branches. Our primary office is in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And at the end of this thing, I'll try to remember to give you some more information about Branches if you're interested in that. I was a pastor for 25 years and a pretty good one, but I also struggle with some behavioral health issues, with some family of origin issues, with some deep, deep wounds that I really didn't even know that I had. And eventually they came to call. Someone said, either you'll deal with your pain or your pain will deal with you. Because I had never dealt with my pain began to deal with me. Made some very poor choices. My wife left me 20 years ago. She should have left 20 years before that. But it was the best thing that ever happened to us. God was faithful. He brought me to a place of healing. I went to a clinic in Arizona for a while, found great healing. And then God restored our marriage, restored my relationship with my children, and now today grandchildren. And they think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. But God is good. He's been very faithful, and I'm incredibly blessed to be able to do the things that I do, and to see His redemptive power at work. I want to talk to you today as spiritual leaders. I want to talk to you about how to understand your thought patterns, how to understand why you think the way you think. Joyce Meyer says we need to think about what we think about. But sometimes before we can think about what we think about, we need to know why we think about it. The Bible is full of encouragement to not only deal with the soul, to not only deal with the heart, but to deal with the mind. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23, Paul says, and I pray that the very God of peace will sanctify you through and through, that your whole body, soul, and spirit. And in that text, the word that we translate soul is actually the word psyche, psyche, your mind. I pray that your whole body, mind, and heart, those were another 3 words we could use, would be sanctified through and through. Romans chapter 12, beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as living sacrifices, as living sacrifices, wholly acceptable before God, which is your reasonable service. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Present your body. Your heart can be changed by renewing your mind. So how do we think about what we think about? What patterns do we follow? How did we get to the place that we are at to even have these habitual thoughts that we have? Particularly as spiritual leaders, particularly as men and women of God who want to make a difference in the world. how do we understand our thinking patterns? Um, there is one way of looking at this that is not unique to me by any means. Virginia Satir is someone I've leaned heavily upon to learn about this. It probably begins as early as Carl Jung, but this idea that there is an inner child at work within us. Carl Jung famously said, "None of us were born adults." There is this inner child at work within us, and how that child develops and how that child copes with the traumas and the circumstances of life begins to shape us, and we begin to find ways to live in this world that we perceive either as healthy or unhealthy, as safe or not safe, as us having value or not having value. How does all that happen? How do we begin that? I have a little exercise I'd like to walk you through today. Now, I confess, I've never done this on video, so it might be, we'll see how it translates. Hopefully it translates well. And I'm going to try to not make it too terribly long, because talking on videos or listening to videos is not the easiest thing. I am grateful for the opportunity to come and join you all, even by Zoom, but my travel and work schedule did not permit that. And so Ross and Angela and I talked about the possibility of doing a recording like this. And aren't you thankful for modern technology that allows us to do such a thing? The Buddha says, you haven't had a great spiritual conversation until you've quoted the Buddha, but the Buddha says, the cry we hear from deep in our hearts comes from the wounded child within. Now, I don't know about taking advice from an old fat man called Buddha, but I do believe that there's some great wisdom to that the cry that we hear in us, where did this come from? It comes from the wounded child that's within us. And I think Jesus had that in mind when he said in Mark 10:15, truly I tell you, anyone who does not receive the kingdom of God like one of these little children, getting back to that childlike innocence. Anybody that doesn't do like that is not even fit to enter the kingdom. So what does that inner child look like for us? How does that translate? How does that work? Now this is very sophisticated. You're gonna have to really stay with me in this. I have some things I'd like to show you. This is my representation of the original feeling child. The original feeling child. It's how we come into this world. We're all born pure and holy, free from the effects of original sin. Now I believe the original sin is already present in us, but we're free from the effects of that. We're free from interpretation. We take the world as it is. We don't interpret it as good or bad, or this is why this happened, or this is why. We're this wonderful, smiling, pure-faced, original feeling child. Do you remember that? Here's an exercise. I want you to go back and remember that. Remember a time when you were the original feeling child. Here's one for me. I was about 4 years old. My grandmother gave me for Christmas a cowboy outfit, the vest, the badge, the 2 6-shooters, the hat, the boots. I remember putting that on and feeling like I was Roy Rogers or Gene Autry or one of those people that you young people have no idea who I'm talking about. But that moment of innocence, of pure joy, of absolute all is right with the world. So the exercise for you, I'd like you to find some time to sit down and just think back a little bit and think of one of your earliest original child moments. One of those times when, before you knew there was sadness. When I was 5, I had a pet rabbit that died. I don't assume that that's some horrible traumatic thing, but it was the first hint in my world that everything is not perfect and easy and good, and sometimes there are sad things. It's the first thing that I remember like that. So that original feeling child, most of the time, by the way, that child takes shape by the time we're about 3 years old. And by then, at 3, we begin to have the ability to interpret. My parents divorced when I was 1.5, and that was painful. There were real feelings, but I couldn't interpret that. I didn't think that was my fault or whose fault it was. It just happened. By the time I'm 3, now my parents divorced when I'm 3.5, and I began to make interpretation about that. My daddy didn't love my mommy anymore. My mommy didn't love me, and so she left us. And so interpretation comes in, and we begin to lose that original feeling child. That we are innocently the center of our universe, and that's okay. The whole world revolves around us in a very innocent way, and it's good, and life is holy and helpful and happy. It's probably where the fruits of the Spirit are found in their purest form: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. In their purest form, those things are found with that original feeling child. You remember that? You remember that moment like that? But then something happens. Life happens. Things begin to change, and the bunny rabbit does die, or parents do divorce, or something does take place. And we move from being this original feeling child to being the wounded, sobbing child. I don't know why I picked that little puppy, but it just seemed like a nice little thing to pick. I'm tender, and my heart is broken. I'm hurt, and I'm whimpering like that little puppy who is taken away from its mommy when it's being weaned. I'm about to make myself cry just talking about that. That wounded, sobbing child, when life is not as easy as we thought it was, and when pain has entered the world, and when we are traumatized in some way. We can be traumatized. In fact, there's a kind of a continuum of trauma, particularly for children, that goes between abusiveness and abandonment. The abusiveness taken all the way to the extreme is that parent who is physically or emotionally or mentally abusive, so engaged in our lives and so controlling as to be abusive. The other end of that is abandonment, which literally could be left in a basket on the steps of the fire station, or somewhere in the middle probably. My father was present but not present. He didn't come to my ball games, those kinds of things. Trauma that happens to us, and we begin to tell ourselves things about ourselves, things about the world around us, and things about God. God is good or not good based on our interpretation of the world around us, based on our own value, based on what our father was like to us or what our mother was like to us. There's trauma, rejection, abuse, abandonment. In many ways, this might be. We talked about the father. In many ways, this might be the sins of the father. I've struggled always with that Old Testament reminder that the sins of the father are visited on their children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Does God punish my great-grandchildren for my behavior? Or is it possible that these wounds that are inflicted by my own doing, that they're passed on, and wound after wound after wound, generation after generation after generation, until we become this wounded, sobbing child? I've lost the original feeling child. I've lost the joy, the innocence, the happiness, and I have moved from being this smiling, pure-faced, wonderful little original feeling child to now being this whimpering puppy that is wounded and hurt and frightened and lives in the corner most of the time. Well, that's about all I have time for. Thank you for being a part of this. That's my bad counseling joke. Nobody wants to live like that. No, nobody wants to be that wounded, sobbing child. In fact, if life is cruel before you're that child, it's terribly cruel after that. If the world finds out that you are that wounded, sobbing child, it is not going to be easy. Life is going to be hard. And so nobody wants to be that. And so very often we move from being the original feeling child to being the wounded, sobbing child to being the defensive, protective child. Now imagine this is a fierce, angry bear. This is my grandson's little bear, so I'm not going to buy him a fierce, angry bear. But just imagine this is a fierce, angry bear. We move to that. We move to being this angry, protective, defensive. Nobody's ever going to do that to me again. I will take care of that wounded, sobbing child, and I'll make sure this never happens to me again. The trauma, the rejection, the abuse, all those things, it wells up within us, and something in us says, I am not going to let that happen ever again. I was 11 years old. My father was bipolar. He was a pastor. He was a good pastor, but he was bipolar. And when he would sink into those depression, when he was manic, he was the best. He was fun and funny and gifted and talented. But when he would sink into that slough of despond, that despair, that depression, I'm sure a lot of that has something to do with why I sought a PhD in clinical psychology and decided to do something different. That despair would create anger. So one night, I'm 11 years old. My parents got into a raging argument, and it seemed to me, as I think back, like it was the middle of the night. But my father was chasing my mother around the house with a butcher knife. He's doing like this. He's chasing her. Now, to this day, it's never been my imagination that he really intended to harm her. I think this was melodramatic, and he was just acting out this anger in her hyper response. She's running and screaming. She comes into my room, gets me out of bed. I'm 11 years old, and she's holding me like this as a shield in front of my father. While he's doing this, she's holding me as a shield. Well, as you can imagine, that original feeling child went out the window right there. And that wounded, sobbing child raised up and said, man, I'm not very smart, but this is not good. And what began to be formed in me was the defensive, protective child that said, I will never let this happen to me again. Two thoughts popped into my beady little brain. One is, I'm expendable. In this room, I'm the one that matters the least. I'm expendable. And the second thing is, if anybody's going to take care of me, it's going to be me. I'm going to have to take care of me. And so without knowing it, 11 years old, I locked my little heart in a box. And I said, nobody will ever get in there again. And when I'm 17, 18, and 19 and wondering why my girlfriend-boyfriend relationships are not going well, when I'm 24, 25, and 26 and wondering why my wife and I are struggling in our marriage, when I am 34, 35 and wondering why I'm not connecting to my children well, and in fact, when I'm wondering why I have a difficult time knowing the love of God. Well, it started when I was 11 years old, and I said, nobody is going to get in that box again and touch that little heart. We become this defensive, protective child that says, I am going to have to take care of the wounded, sobbing child, and nobody is going to hurt that child again. We can do that in a lot of different ways. We can do it with anger. We do become angry. We become mad at the world. As my wife and I were struggling, my son said to her one time, is Daddy mad at us? And Doris was intuitive enough to know. She said, no, Jacob, Daddy's not mad at us. Daddy is mad at the world, and he doesn't know how to talk about that, how to express that. We become angry, and we live our lives as angry people. Nobody's gonna cut me off in traffic. Nobody's gonna get in front of me in line, and road rage and all those things come out of that. We just isolate. We pull away. We separate. That was me. Nobody's going to touch my little heart. We have friends, but only so far. We let people come in, but not too. We don't let them get too close. My wife said to me, you have 1,000 friends and nobody's close to you. You don't let anybody get close. We isolate. We get angry. We become codependent. We become people pleasers. We're gonna We're going to do everything in our power to make that person like me. Whatever I have to do, my value, my worth is dependent on that person or those people liking me. We become narcissistic. We circle the wagons. We make the world about us. We make the universe about us. And all of our thinking and all of our behaviors, how does this impact me? How does it affect me? Now, I hope, speaking of codependent, I hope you like me so far. Hope this has been good because I'm getting ready to make you really mad. That is especially true in men and women who follow a call to ministry. In fact, let me really offend you. Very often our call to ministry comes out of that. Now, and that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean God can't use that. But the reason I respond to a call to ministry, maybe if I'm a good enough pastor, I can make these people like me. Maybe if I'm holy enough, I can make God like me. Maybe if I rail against the evils of the world, then somebody will care about me. Somebody will like me. And so very often out of our anger or our codependency or our isolation or our narcissism, we become spiritual leaders. And that's okay for a while. But again, if we don't deal with our pain will deal with us. That'll come back to haunt us again, and things will begin to go the wrong way. So we move from being this I keep laying my inner child down. We move from being this original feeling child, pure, innocent, joyful, to being this wounded, sobbing child who's hurt and frightened and fearful. And then, because we can't live that way, we become this defensive, protective child that develops some kind of persona to say, you are not going to get at that person again. I'm going to make sure that you never hurt that little child again. Now, most of the time this doesn't work. We can't live this way. We don't make friends. We don't socialize very well. And so we finally evolve to something that helps us to live a somewhat normal life, but to keep all of this stuff at bay. I call it a smiling coping child. I have no idea what this is. It's just this very robotic kind of face, no expression, no emotion. I think maybe it's a Lego face. Oh, it's a Minecraft face. I still have the tags on it. It's about time I took the tags off my stuffed animals. No expression, no emotion. We find a way to cope. We find a way to hide all of that. The original feeling child, the wounded, sobbing child, the defensive, protective child. We hide all of that behind this persona, behind this person that we've become. We become great pastors. We become wonderful Bible teachers. We become great men and women of God. But all of that hiding, a facade that's hiding what's going on deep inside us. We put on a face. We repress our feelings. We serve. If we can just serve enough, then nobody will ever know how angry or frightened or rejected or abandoned or how worthless we feel. And we develop this smiling, coping child. And most of us go through adulthood wondering why these patterns resurface, wondering why these things come up, wondering why we deal with the things that we deal with, and never taking time to really examine how we got in this place in the first place. Does that make sense? These stages, and by the way, I think also we kind of move in and out of those from time to time. I think I've got a pretty good handle on that defensive, protective child. I don't let him come out very much. But, you let somebody say something to me in church that just crosses me the wrong way. And, man, that angry, defensive, protective child can come out. I don't let people bother me too much. And somebody says something, and all of a sudden, the wounded, sobbing child comes out. And I'm just devastated. I'm so hurt by something that really... Why is that? It's because these children are living within us. And again, as the Buddha said, the cry in us is really the cry of that wounded child that desperately needs to be loved, to need to be nurtured to need to be cared for. So what do we do about that? Well, I've jotted down 4 things, I think. Yeah, 4 things that I suggest to you. By the way, I want to go back and give you some assignments. I got carried away and didn't. I gave you the assignment for the original feeling child. Think about, find a quiet time. Think about that and write out that little scene. Just write it out. Got a cowboy outfit.